The rain lashed against the windows of the Ashford mansion, nature's fury matching the storm brewing inside Nora Ashford's heart. She stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror, barely recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. The custom designer wedding gown, worth more than most people's annual salary, felt like a prison garment, each crystal and pearl weighing her down like shackles. 10 minutes, Miss Ashford, called the wedding coordinator through the door. Your father insists we keep to schedule, despite the weather. Nora's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the vanity. Of course, Charles Ashford wouldn't let a mere hurricane delay his business transaction. That's all this wedding was to him, merging his real estate empire with Victor Langston's international holdings, with his daughter as the collateral. I've prepared my whole life for this, she whispered to herself, the lie bitter on her tongue. What she had prepared for was becoming one of the country's most innovative architects. Her degree from MIT wasn't meant to collect dust while she played corporate wife to a man whose touch made her skin crawl. The thunderclap that shook the windows felt like a sign. Nora's gaze landed on the small purse containing her essentials. ID, credit cards, her father couldn't track, and the emergency cash she'd been secretly saving. It was now or never. Without allowing herself another moment of hesitation, she grabbed the purse, kicked off her heels, and opened the bedroom window. The service ladder used by maintenance staff provided her escape route down to the garden. The rain soaked her immediately, plastering the silk gown to her body as she descended, thunder masking any sound of her departure. Across the expansive grounds, she could see the glow from the estate's chapel, where 200 of New York's elite waited. Her father would be checking his watch by now, his patience wearing thin. Victor would be straightening his tie, thinking about the Ashford assets he'd soon control, including Charles's only daughter. Nora ran through the sculpted gardens, her bare feet sinking into the mud, the pristine white dress collecting dirt and tearing on the rose bushes she passed. Each step took her further from the life chosen for her and closer to a frightening unknown. At the service entrance, luck was on her side. A catering van sat idling, the driver having stepped away. Nora slipped inside, crouching behind stacked boxes of champagne until the vehicle passed through the gates of her family estate for what she hoped was the last time. Where to, lady? The startled driver asked 15 minutes later, discovering his stowaway after stopping at a traffic light in Manhattan. Anywhere that's not here, Nora replied, offering the only $100 bill she had on hand. The driver, taking in her bedraggled wedding dress in desperate expression, nodded silently and pocketed the money. When he dropped her off in Midtown, the rain still poured mercilessly. Nora stood under the inadequate shelter of a store awning, the reality of her situation sinking in. Her father would have discovered her absence by now. The Ashfords didn't tolerate embarrassment, and Charles wouldn't rest until she was found. She needed shelter, somewhere to think, to plan her next move. The glowing sign of the Pinnacle Hotel beckoned across the street, the most exclusive hotel in the city, and, ironically, a property her father had tried unsuccessfully to acquire for years. It would be the last place he'd look for her. Summoning her courage, Nora crossed the street and slipped through the grand entrance, head down, her once magnificent dress now a sodden, muddy mess. The night staff was busy with a commotion surrounding the arrival of several black SUVs, and Nora seized the opportunity to make her way to the elevators unnoticed. She pressed the button for the highest floor. Her keycardless status would allow. Perhaps she could find an unlocked maintenance room, a quiet corner anywhere to hide and gather her thoughts. On the 40th floor, the elevator doors opened to a hushed, opulent hallway lined with only 4 doors, the hotel's most exclusive suites. Nora tried the handles discreetly as she passed. All were locked, as expected, until the last one. The corner presidential suite yielded to her touch. Heart pounding, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The vast suite was dimly lit, with floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing the storm-lashed city. Champagne bottles and glasses littered a coffee table, evidence of some celebration. It was only after the door clicked shut behind her that Nora noticed the figure sprawled across the massive leather sofa. A man, his tie loosened and dark hair disheveled, lay sleeping or unconscious, an empty whiskey tumbler dangling from his fingertips. With a jolt of recognition, Nora realized she was looking at Ethan Vance, the notorious ruthless CEO of Vance Enterprises, whose face regularly graced business magazines and tabloids alike. Just that morning, the news had reported his latest triumph, a billion-dollar merger that had sent stocks soaring and competitors scrambling. She should leave immediately. Ethan Vance was known for his cutthroat business tactics, his merciless treatment of enemies, and his cold dismissal of anyone who crossed him. But as Nora turned to retreat, A harsh voice froze her in place. "Unless you're here to kill me," Ethan Vance growled without opening his eyes. "You've got exactly 3 seconds to explain why you're in my suite before I call security." Nora stood paralyzed, water pooling at her feet on the marble floor, her ruined wedding dress clinging to her shivering body. As Ethan Vance's eyes finally opened, piercing and alert, despite the empty bottles surrounding him, she realized she had fled one dangerous man, only to find herself at the mercy of another, whose reputation was infinitely more terrifying. The rain intensified against the windows, and Nora Ashford, brilliant, desperate, and out of options, faced the man who might become either her salvation or her downfall. Chapter 2. Dangerous proposition. Ethan Vance sat up, his movements controlled despite the alcohol clouding his system. Even in his disheveled state designer's shirt wrinkled, 5 o'clock shadow darkening his jaw, he exuded the dangerous power that had made him a legend in corporate America. His eyes, steel gray and unnervingly focused, took in every detail of the unexpected intruder. "A runaway bride," he observed, his voice a low rumble as he set the empty tumbler on the table. "In my suite." How theatrical. Nora straightened her spine, refusing to cower despite her vulnerability. "I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Vance." The door was unlocked. "I'll leave immediately." As she turned toward the exit, Ethan's voice stopped her. "And go where? Exactly? Back to whoever you're running from in that ruined designer gown?" He reached for the whiskey bottle, pouring another measure with steady hands. "Must be someone significant. Not many women would brave this storm to escape a wedding." Something in his analytical tone, curiosity rather than threat, made Nora pause. "My father's business partner. A merger of assets with me as the primary commodity." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Ethan's eyebrow arched. "Charles Ashford's daughter," he concluded, the ghost of a smirk touching his lips. "I declined an invitation to your wedding. Seems I made the right choice, considering it apparently never happened." Nora's breath caught. Of course Ethan Vance would recognize her name. The Ashford Langston merger had been business news for months, though her father had kept her largely out of the publicity. "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Vance," she replied, gathering her courage. "But I've interrupted your celebration. Congratulations on your merger." "Not celebrating," he corrected, swirling the amber liquid. "Mourning the compromise of my principles, business necessities." He studied her with unexpected intensity. "You're shivering. Bathroom's through there. There's a robe. Towels. Get dry before you catch pneumonia on my floor." I'm not in the mood for a lawsuit from Charles Ashford for endangering his prodigal daughter. Surprised by the practical offer, Nora hesitated only briefly before moving toward the bathroom. Minutes later, she emerged in the hotel's plush robe, her sodden dress draped over her arm, her dark curls wrapped in a towel. Ethan had removed his tie completely and was standing at the windows, watching the storm rage over the city. He'd ordered coffee from room service, the rich aroma filling the suite. "Why architecture?" he asked without turning. "Excuse me? MIT. Top of your class. You could have gone into the family business. Instead, you chose to design buildings rather than acquire them." He glanced over his shoulder. "I make it my business to know about influential families. I believe in creating, not consuming," Nora answered, disconcerted by his knowledge of her. "In building something meaningful rather than merely profitable." Ethan turned fully, something like respect flickering across his features. "Idealism. Refreshing, if impractical." He gestured to the seating area. "Sit, drink your coffee, then tell me who, besides your father, is hunting you tonight." Nora sank onto the edge of an armchair, accepting the cup he offered. "Victor Langston won't take rejection lightly. His pride is as inflated as his offshore account." She met Ethan's gaze directly. "He's also as connected as my father. By morning, every hotel in Manhattan will have my description." Ethan studied her, calculation clear in his expression. "Charles Ashford tried to buy this hotel from me 3 times. I refused. He's not welcome here, nor his associates." He returned to his position by the window. "You can stay the night. Tomorrow, you'll need a plan." "Why would you help me?" Nora asked, suspicion edging her voice. "Ethan," he corrected, "and I'm not offering a cage, Miss Ashford. I'm offering a mutually beneficial arrangement." "Nora," she replied automatically, weariness creeping up her spine. "What arrangement?" "My PR team has been hounding me to soften my image. The ruthless corporate raider narrative is becoming problematic for certain international negotiations." He spoke matter-of-factly, as though discussing the weather rather than his life. "Meanwhile, you need protection from your father and Langston while you establish your independence." Nora's eyes narrowed. "You can't possibly be suggesting a strategic alliance," Ethan interrupted. "You pose as my fiancé, giving me the improved public image I need. In return, you get my protection, an impeccable cover story, and the resources to build your career without your father's interference. A fake engagement, Nora clarified, disbelief coloring her tone. Precisely. No emotional entanglements, no complications, pure business. Ethan's face remained impassive. Your father wouldn't dare move against my fiancée, and Langston would be forced to retreat. My reputation would ensure your safety, while I help humanize the notorious Ethan Vance for the press, Nora added, catching on quickly. Brilliant business mind falls for independent, accomplished woman. The tabloids would love it. The arrangement would be temporary, 6 months, perhaps a year. Ethan continued, long enough to serve both our purposes. Then, an amicable, private parting of ways. You'd be free to pursue your career with doors opened rather than closed by the Ashford name. Nora stood, moving to the window beside him, watching lightning split the sky. And if I refuse your proposition, then I wish you luck, Ethan said simply. The storm should clear by morning. You'll be free to leave, and I'll forget I ever found you in my suite. Silence stretched between them as Nora weighed her options. Every door in New York would close to her once her father made calls. Her accounts would be frozen, her contacts pressured. She had savings, but not enough to disappear completely. If I agree, she said finally, turning to face him. I have conditions. Something like amusement flickered in Ethan's eyes. I expected nothing less. This is a business arrangement only. We present as a couple publicly, but maintain appropriate boundaries privately. Nora's voice gained strength. I keep my own suite, my own space. I'm not your possession or your plaything. Ethan nodded once, expectantly. I continue my architectural work. You provide introductions but don't interfere with my projects. My career is non-negotiable. Reasonable, Ethan agreed. And most importantly, Nora continued, her gaze unwavering, you treat me with respect. Always. Your reputation for breaking both deals and hearts precedes you. But I won't be another casualty of Ethan Vance's infamous coldness. We're partners in this charade, equals regardless of your wealth or position. Ethan's expression remained unreadable as he extended his hand. Do we have an agreement, Miss Ashford? Nora hesitated only briefly before clasping his hand, surprised by the warmth of his grip. We do, Mr. Vance. Outside, the storm began to subside. But inside the presidential suite of the Pinnacle, a more complex tempest was just beginning to form. First rule of business, Ethan said, releasing her hand, get some sleep. The guest room is yours. Tomorrow, we begin constructing our story and your new life. As Nora retreated to the offered sanctuary, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a deal with a devil who might be more dangerous than the ones she'd fled. Yet, for the first time since her father had announced her engagement to Victor Langston, she felt something unexpected. Hope. Behind her, Ethan Vance watched her departure, his expression softening momentarily into something resembling genuine curiosity before the mask of the ruthless CEO fell back into place. He returned to the window, no longer seeing the storm, but instead contemplating the unexpected chess move fate had dropped into his carefully ordered existence. Chapter 3. Ice and Fire. Morning sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows as Nora reviewed the relationship timeline Ethan had drafted. She barely registered his return from early meetings. The Times is calling us Manhattan's most surprising power couple, Ethan announced, setting a newspaper beside her sketches. Their gala photograph dominated the society page, Ethan looking at her with apparent admiration. Their chemistry undeniable, even in print. My social media accounts have exploded, Nora noted. 3 architectural firms have suddenly discovered my portfolio and requested meetings. Your father must be apoplectic, Ethan replied with satisfaction. His stock dropped 3 points this morning. I'm not an asset to be leveraged, Nora reminded him, returning to her drawings. No, Ethan agreed, his tone softening. You're considerably more valuable than that. The casual compliment hung in the air between them. Ethan switched to business mode. Daniel will be visiting to discuss our arrangement. Your CFO doesn't approve of your fake fiancé? Nora asked. Daniel doesn't approve of anything that introduces variables into carefully constructed plans, Ethan replied. He's been managing risk for me since we were children. When Daniel arrived, his scrutiny of Nora was unmasked. MIT architecture, summa cum laude, rejected 3 prestigious firms to work independently. Estranged from your father as of 4 days ago. I did my homework. I'd expect nothing less from Ethan's right hand, Nora replied coolly. Daniel, Ethan warned. Nora is not under investigation. Everyone connected to you warrants investigation, Daniel countered, his expression unusually tense. Charles Ashford is not someone to antagonize lightly. He has connections that reach places even you can't protect against. Sounds like you're speaking from experience, Ethan noted. Daniel adjusted his glasses nervously. I'm speaking from caution. My family in Taiwan, there are still citizens there. International business can get complicated. He quickly changed subjects, and let's not forget your history with women. The Morgan divorce nearly cost us the European expansion. Evelyn Morgan was a mistake. Ethan acknowledged without looking up. Nora Ashford is a strategy, Daniel repeated skeptically. Not an impulsive decision triggered by finding a beautiful woman in your hotel suite? After Daniel departed with obvious reluctance, Nora asked about Evelyn Morgan. A mistake, Ethan replied, his expression hardening. She wanted access to company information, used our relationship to get it, then leveraged it during our divorce. And now Daniel's warning you about me, Nora observed. Yes. Though he seems unusually agitated lately, Ethan admitted with a slight frown. He's been receiving calls he won't take in the office. Later that afternoon, Nora visited Vance Enterprises at Emma's invitation. The company headquarters revealed itself to be surprisingly innovative and socially conscious in many of its developments. The staff lounge was Ethan's insistence, Emma explained, showing her a bright space with quality food and comfortable seating. He remembers his mother never having decent places to rest during her factory shifts. In the design department, Nora studied architectural models of current projects with professional interest until one stopped her cold. The East Side project, with its sleek tower rising from a model neighborhood, James Carter, the development director, approached her. You must be Ethan's fiancée. Your reputation precedes you, Miss Ashford. Just Nora, please, she replied. This design will cast significant shadows on Unity Park, especially in winter months. Carter's smile tightened. A necessary compromise for density requirements, formalities, Nora repeated when he dismissed community objections as mere formalities. Those formalities represent people's lives and heritage. Ethan appeared in the doorway, watching their exchange with an unreadable expression. James, Ethan acknowledged coolly, I see you've met my fiancé, put on the spot. Nora outlined her alternative approach to the design. When she finished, Ethan studied the model thoughtfully. Implement her changes, he said finally, surprising both Nora and Carter. Later, in Ethan's private office, he showed her a simple shadow box frame containing a factory time card and worn work glove. My mother's, he said quietly, from her last shift at Carter Industries, 16 hours on the assembly line before a support beam collapsed, killing her and my father instantly. His voice remained even, but Nora could feel the controlled emotion beneath it. The company had ignored safety violations for years to maximize profits. Ethan, I'm so sorry, Nora whispered, reaching for his hand in a gesture of pure instinct. Ethan looked down at their joined hands with surprise but didn't pull away. For a moment, they stood in silence. Connected by more than their staged engagement, the buzz of Ethan's phone shattered the moment. Your father has scheduled a press conference, he said, all vulnerability vanishing. He plans to publicly question the legitimacy of our engagement. He's trying to paint me as unstable or coerced, Nora realized. He's miscalculated. Ethan replied coldly, public sympathy will favor the reunited daughter over the controlling father. The professional distance reasserted itself between them, the glimpse of connection fading as rapidly as it had appeared. Chapter 4. The Public Eye. The Metropolitan Museum's annual charity gala transformed its grand staircase into a river of designer gowns and bespoke suits, flashbulbs creating a constant twilight as New York's elite performed their carefully choreographed entrances. Reporters called out questions. Social media buzzed with real-time fashion critiques, and security maintained the invisible barrier between the observed and observers. In the back of Ethan's Bentley, Nora smoothed the skirt of her midnight blue gown, its architectural silhouette and subtle shimmer a perfect complement to her deep brown skin. Nervous? Ethan asked, his gaze assessing her with that clinical precision she was beginning to recognize. Focused, Nora corrected. This isn't my first high society event, just my first one where I'm not representing the Ashford name. Ethan nodded, adjusting his platinum cufflinks. Remember, we met at the urban development auction. You outbid me for the Calatrava sketch. I told you my West Side development lacked soul. You asked me to dinner to continue the argument. 5 months later, here we are. She offered a practiced smile. I've memorized our script, Ethan. I won't embarrass you. I wasn't questioning your competence, he replied, a hint of amusement softening his features. I was going to say, remember that you belong here on your own merits. Your name may open doors, but your mind is what commands respect. The unexpected encouragement caught Nora off guard. Before she could respond, the car stopped, and Ethan's driver opened the door to a wall of camera flashes. Ethan emerged first, his tall figure commanding immediate attention in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. When he turned to offer Nora his hand, his expression transformed with such convincing warmth that even she momentarily believed it. His fingers entwined with hers as he helped her from the car, his touch firm but gentle. "Showtime," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. The reporters noticed their linked hands immediately, voices rising in a chaotic chorus. "Mr. Vance, who's your date tonight? Are you seeing someone, Ethan?" Miss, this way." With practiced ease, Ethan guided Nora through the gauntlet, his hand resting protectively at the small of her back. At the designated spot on the carpet, he paused, allowing photographers their moment while keeping Nora close to his side. "Ethan Vance with Nora Ashford." Someone whispered loudly enough to be overheard. "Charles Ashford's daughter." The whispers rippled through the crowd, camera flashes intensifying as reporters connected the implications. Ethan leaned down, his lips close to Nora's ear, the gesture intimate and possessive for their audience. "3 more minutes of this circus, then we're inside," he promised, his public smile never wavering. Nora played her part beautifully, gazing up at him with convincing adoration, her hand resting lightly on his chest. The diamond on her left hand, a loaner from Cartier that had arrived that afternoon, caught the light spectacularly. By the time they entered the museum's great hall, social media was ablaze with speculation, and their images were being transmitted to news outlets across the city. "Mr. Vance," a reporter from the Wall Street Journal approached as they accepted champagne from a passing server. "Lucas Rivera, might I ask about your companion tonight? There are whispers this is more than a casual date." Ethan's arm slipped around Nora's waist, his expression softening as he looked down at her. "Nora and I have been keeping our relationship private. But yes, we recently became engaged." The practiced words triggered a fresh wave of excitement among nearby journalists. Nora leaned into Ethan's embrace, her smile perfect as cameras captured the moment. "Miss Ashford," Rivera continued, "this must be quite a departure from your family's expectations. Your father's arrangement with Victor Langston was widely reported." Nora felt Ethan's arm tighten slightly around her waist, a silent message of support. "My father has his vision for business partnerships," she replied smoothly. "I have my own for life partnerships. I'm fortunate to have found someone who values both my mind and my heart." Ethan's expression of pride seemed so genuine that Nora almost believed it herself. "If you'll excuse us," he said to the reporter, "I see people we should greet." As they moved deeper into the gala, Ethan maintained their physical connection, a hand at her waist, fingers lightly entwined, the occasional brush of his lips against her temple, each gesture calculated, yet performed with such natural ease that observers exchanged knowing smiles at the obvious chemistry between the notorious CEO and his unexpected fiancée. "Charles Ashford just arrived," Ethan murmured during a momentary respite near a sculpture display, northwest on Trents. "Don't look now." Nora sipped her champagne, maintaining her relaxed expression. "Is Victor with him?" "No, but your father appears to have seen us." His expression suggests indigestion rather than paternal joy. Despite herself, Nora felt a tremor of anxiety. Ethan must have sensed it. His hand moved to the small of her back, warm and steady, through the thin fabric of her gown. "Remember your leverage," he said quietly. "A scene here would damage him far more than you. We hold the stronger position." The assurance in his voice steadied her. This was business to Ethan's strategic positioning, power dynamics, and in that realm, she knew he was unmatched. "Vance, finally decided to grace us mere mortals with your presence?" The booming voice belonged to Oliver Brooks, CEO of a rival development company, his florid complexion suggesting he was several drinks ahead of the other guests, and with such exquisite company, the Ashford heiress herself. "Oliver," Ethan acknowledged coolly. "May I present my fiancée, Nora Ashford?" "Nora," Oliver Brooks of Brooks Developments repeated, his eyebrows rising dramatically. "Fiancé? Well, the Ice King melts at last." He turned to Nora with an assessing gaze that lingered uncomfortably on her figure. "Tell me, my dear, what magic did you work to tame the untamable? The betting pools around Manhattan will be in chaos." Before Nora could respond, Oliver continued, his tone condescending. "Though I suppose beauty has always been Ethan's weakness. Remember that Italian model last year? Stunning creature, absolutely vacuous." He laughed heartily at his own comment. Nora felt Ethan tense beside her but placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Actually, Mr. Brooks," she said pleasantly, "Ethan was drawn to my architectural critique of his West Side development. I found the integration of green spaces promising but the community accessibility problematic." Brooks's smirk faltered. "Architectural critique? You're not just a pretty face playing at business then. MIT School of Architecture. Mr. Brooks, I specialized in sustainable urban integration. Nora's smile remained perfectly pleasant. Your Harbor Point project, for instance, while aesthetically impressive places, parking structures where community spaces could create far greater long-term value, both financially and socially. The color rising in Brooks's face had nothing to do with alcohol now. You've studied my developments? I make it a point to analyze the work of all major firms in the city, Nora replied, especially those who consistently prioritize short-term profits over sustainable community growth. Ethan's hand at her waist gave a subtle, appreciative squeeze. You'll have to excuse us, Oliver, he said, not bothering to mask his satisfaction. The museum director is waiting. As they moved away, Ethan leaned close to her ear. That was magnificent, he murmured. Genuine admiration in his voice. Brooks has been trying to poach my investors for months. You just publicly eviscerated his entire business philosophy. He deserved worse, Nora replied, her smile never faltering for their audience. Men like him assume women are decorative accessories, not thinking partners. A mistake I won't make, Ethan said, and something in his tone made Nora glance up sharply. The admiration in his eyes seemed too genuine for their charade, a warmth there she hadn't seen before. The remainder of the evening passed in a whirlwind of introductions and carefully navigated conversations. Nora impressed Ethan's business associates with her insightful comments and charmed the social elite with her genuine interest in their charitable causes. Throughout it all, Ethan remained at her side, the perfect, attentive fiancé, his public persona warmer and more approachable than anyone could remember seeing. By the time they finally slipped away from the gala, the night's narrative had been successfully established in both the business press and social media. Ruthless tycoon Ethan Vance had found his match in the brilliant, independent Nora Ashford, whose decision to break from her family's expectations for love had the city's romantics swooning. In the sanctuary of the Bentley, Nora finally allowed her perfect posture to relax, kicking off her heels with a sigh of relief. Your performance exceeded expectations, Ethan said as the car pulled away from the museum. Every major publication will be covering our engagement by morning. Your acting wasn't bad either, Nora replied, massaging her feet. I almost believed you were madly in love with me a few times there. A ghost of a smile touched Ethan's lips. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals with hostile foreign governments. Pretending to be captivated by an intelligent, beautiful woman is hardly a challenge. The casual compliment hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging the momentary shift it created. Nora turned to gaze out the window, unwilling to examine why her heart had quickened at his words. Your father cornered me in the cigar room, Ethan said after a moment, his tone returning to business. He suggested I was adding corporate kidnapping to my list of offenses. Nora turned back to him sharply. What did you tell him? That his daughter is a grown woman who makes her own choices, and that threats against either of us would be met with the full force of my considerable resources. Ethan's expression hardened. He didn't appreciate being reminded that my legal team is significantly larger than his. He won't give up easily, Nora warned. Charles Ashford doesn't accept defeat, especially not from his own daughter. Neither do I, Ethan replied simply, and unlike your father, I play to win, not merely to avoid losing. The confidence in his voice was oddly reassuring. For the first time since fleeing her wedding, Nora felt truly protected, not just physically, but strategically. Ethan Vance might be ruthless, but he was ruthless in her defense now. As the Bentley glided through the late-night streets, Nora found herself studying his profile in the passing streetlights. The strong jaw, the intensity of focus even in repose, to the occasional flash of something deeper behind his carefully maintained facade. Thank you, she said softly, for tonight, for all of this. Ethan turned to her, his expression unreadable. We made a deal. I keep my promises. Is that all this is to you, a business arrangement? The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. For a moment, Ethan said nothing, his gaze searching hers with unexpected intensity. It's what we agreed to, he finally replied, his voice lower, rougher. Anything else would be complicated. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something neither was willing to name. Nora became acutely aware of the small distance separating them on the leather seat, the lingering scent of his cologne, the memory of his hand at her waist throughout the evening. Complicated isn't always bad, she found herself saying, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's gaze dropped briefly to her lips, then back to her eyes, something like conflict passing across his features. Nora, whatever he might have said, was cut short as the car pulled smoothly to a stop outside the Pinnacle. The moment shattered, reality reasserting itself as the driver opened the door. Yet, as they rode the elevator to the penthouse level in silence, The tension remained an unacknowledged undercurrent beneath their carefully constructed arrangement. At the door to her suite, Nora paused, turning to face Ethan with sudden determination. "We should practice," she said. "Practice what?" "This." With unexpected boldness, Nora reached up, her hand resting lightly against his cheek as she pressed her lips to his. The kiss was intended to be brief, practical, a necessary rehearsal for their public performance, but the moment their lips met, something shifted. Ethan remained perfectly still for only a second before his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened from experimental to something far more dangerous. His mouth moved against hers with unexpected gentleness, belying the strength in the hands that held her. Nora's fingers slid into his hair, her body arching instinctively into his as what had begun as pretense transformed into something undeniably real. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unevenly. The pretense of clinical practice impossible to maintain. Ethan's eyes had darkened, the usual cool calculation replaced by heat that made Nora's pulse race. "That was," she began. "Convincing," Ethan supplied, his voice rough as he slowly released her. Their retreat to safer ground was palpable, both of them stepping back from the precipice the kiss had revealed. Nora nodded, grateful for the excuse, even as something within her protested the return to their scripted roles. "Good night, Ethan," she said, her hand on the door handle. "Good night, Nora." His expression had already begun to recompose itself, the momentary vulnerability receding. As her door closed between them, Nora leaned against it, her fingertips touching her still tingling lips, confronting the uncomfortable truth that their performance was becoming dangerously real, at least for her. On the other side, unknown to her, Ethan stood motionless, his carefully ordered world suddenly, unexpectedly tilted on its axis by a kiss that had been meant for show but had awakened something he'd long believed frozen beyond recovery. Chapter 5. Shadows from the Past. Morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse as Nora reviewed architectural renderings at the dining table. Her focus so complete, she barely registered the elevator's soft ping, announcing Ethan's return from his early meetings. "The Times is calling us Manhattan's most surprising power couple," Ethan announced, setting a newspaper beside her sketches. Their photograph from the gala dominated the society page, Ethan looking at her with what appeared to be genuine admiration, Nora smiling up at him, their chemistry undeniable even in print. The post went with, "Beauty tames the beast," he continued, removing his suit jacket. "Considerably less elegant, but achieving our objective." Nora glanced at the headline, unable to suppress a smile. "My social media accounts have exploded. 3 architectural firms have suddenly discovered my portfolio and requested meetings." Ethan nodded with satisfaction. "Your father must be apoplectic." His stock dropped 3 points this morning after investors questioned the stability of the Langston merger without the Ashford heiress involved. "I'm not an asset to be leveraged," Nora reminded him, returning to her drawings. "No," Ethan agreed, his tone softening slightly as he poured himself coffee. "You're considerably more valuable than that." The casual compliment brought back memories of their kiss the previous night, a moment neither had mentioned since. Nora kept her eyes on her work, ignoring the warmth creeping up her neck. "Daniel's coming by to discuss the East Side project," Ethan said, switching to business mode. "He has concerns about our arrangement." "Your CFO doesn't approve of your fake fiancé?" Nora asked, finally looking up. "Daniel doesn't approve of anything that introduces variables into carefully constructed plans," Ethan replied. "He's been managing risk for me since we were children." The elevator announced another arrival. Daniel Chen entered with the brisk efficiency that matched his reputation as Vance Enterprises' operational genius. Short, with wire-rimmed glasses and an impeccable suit, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. "The fiancée herself," Daniel said, assessing Nora with unmasked scrutiny. "MIT architecture, summa cum laude. Rejected 3 positions at prestigious firms to work independently. Estranged from your father as of 4 days ago." He offered a tight smile. "I did my homework. I'd expect nothing less from Ethan's right hand," Nora replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Daniel," Ethan warned, "Nora is not under investigation. Everyone connected to you warrants investigation," Daniel countered unapologetically. "Particularly someone with her family connections. I haven't spoken to my father since I left," Nora said firmly. "I have no interest in corporate espionage, if that's your concern." Daniel's expression remained skeptical. "Ethan has a history of allowing his personal life to cloud his judgment." "Evelyn Morgan, nearly." "That's enough." Ethan cut him off sharply. "Nora is aware of my past mistakes. Our arrangement is different, because it's business, not pleasure." Daniel challenged, The Times photo suggests otherwise. An uncomfortable silence fell. Nora rose with deliberate calm. I'll give you two some privacy for this discussion. No, Ethan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Daniel needs to understand that insulting you insults me. He turned to his friend. Say what you came to say about the East Side project, then leave. Your concerns about my personal life are noted and dismissed. Daniel's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected rebuke. After a moment, he nodded curtly and opened his tablet. Transitioning to business with practiced ease, the community board is pushing back on the height restrictions. They're demanding more affordable units and threatening to involve the Historical Preservation Committee. Ethan frowned. The zoning allows for 60 stories. We've already compromised at 48. The building would cast shadow over Unity Park, Daniel explained. They're concerned about the impact on the historic black neighborhood that's finally recovering after decades of neglect. A subtle tension filled the room. Nora glanced between the two men, sensing an unspoken history beneath the business discussion. After Daniel departed with obvious reluctance, an awkward silence settled over the penthouse. Your friend doesn't trust me, Nora observed finally. Daniel doesn't trust anyone, Ethan replied, loosening his tie. But he's loyal beyond reason. He saved me from myself, more times than I can count. Saved you from women like Evelyn Morgan? Nora asked carefully. Ethan's expression hardened. A mistake. She wanted access to company information, used our relationship to get it, then tried to leverage it during our divorce. Daniel warned me. I didn't listen, and now he's warning you about me. Yes, though he seems unusually agitated lately, Ethan admitted with a slight frown. He's been receiving calls he won't take in the office, and yesterday I found him erasing something from his computer when I walked in. He claimed it was just personal family matters. Could it be trouble with his family in Taiwan? Nora asked. Ethan's brow furrowed. I hadn't considered that. Daniel's always been private about his family, but he seemed distracted recently, more than your appearance in my life would explain. History informing present caution. Ethan moved to the window, gazing out at the city. Daniel grew up watching his parents struggle after being cheated by supposed friends. Trust doesn't come easily to either of us. Later that afternoon, after Ethan departed for meetings, Nora found herself restless in the confines of the penthouse. On impulse, she texted Emma, asking if she might visit Vance Enterprises to better understand Ethan's work. To her surprise, the assistant immediately arranged security clearance. The company's headquarters occupied 20 floors of a sleek tower in Midtown. Emma proved an informative guide, explaining the company's structure and major projects with obvious pride. Unlike the cold corporate machine Nora had imagined, Vance Enterprises revealed itself to be innovative and surprisingly socially conscious in many of its developments. Their tour eventually led to the design department, where architectural models of current projects lined the wall. Nora moved among them with professional interest until one stopped her cold. The East Side project, she murmured, studying the sleek tower rising from a model neighborhood. Our most ambitious development this year, said a male voice behind her. Nora turned to find a tall, silver-haired man watching her with open curiosity. His expensive suit and authoritative bearing marking him as an executive. James Carter, development director. He introduced himself. You must be Ethan's fiancé. Your reputation precedes you, Miss Ashford. Just Nora, please, she replied, shaking his offered hand. I was admiring your models. The Calver section here is particularly bold. You know architecture, Carter observed, seeming genuinely surprised. MIT, Nora explained, used to the reaction. This design will cast significant shadows on Unity Park, especially in winter months. Carter's smile tightened. A necessary compromise for density requirements, not necessarily, Nora countered, pointing to specific elements. Adjusting the orientation and tapering the upper floors would preserve your square footage while minimizing shadow impact. An interesting theory, Carter said dismissively. But the design is finalized. The community objections are merely formalities to navigate. Formalities? Nora repeated, anger rising. Those formalities represent people's lives and heritage. Before Carter could respond, she noticed Ethan standing in the doorway, watching their exchange with an unreadable expression. James, Ethan acknowledged coolly. Moving to Nora's side, I see you've met my fiancé. Indeed, Carter replied, his tone carefully neutral. She was just sharing some theoretical concerns about the East Side project. Theoretical? Ethan turned to Nora. Please elaborate. Put on the spot. Nora hesitated only briefly before pointing to the model. The current design prioritizes maximum height over community integration. It will cast Unity Park into shadow for approximately 6 hours daily during winter months, affecting both residential quality of life and the historic community garden. Ethan studied the model, his expression thoughtful. "And your solution?" Nora outlined her alternative approach, professional training overriding her awareness of Carter's growing discomfort. When she finished, silence hung in the air as Ethan considered the model. "Implement her changes," he said finally. Carter blinked. "Ethan, the redesign costs alone are less than the delays we'll face from community opposition," Ethan finished. "Make it happen, James." After Carter departed, Ethan turned to Nora with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "You've made an enemy today," he said. "I wasn't trying to undermine your director," Nora replied. "I just couldn't stand by while he dismissed an entire community's concerns as formalities." Ethan led her to his private office, a vast space with panoramic views of the city. One wall held framed photographs of Vance Enterprises projects, but Ethan guided her to a different display. A simple shadow box frame containing what appeared to be a factory time card and a worn work glove. "My mother's," he said quietly, "from her last shift at Carter Industries, 16 hours on the assembly line the day before a support beam collapsed, killing her and my father instantly." His voice remained even, but Nora could feel the tightly controlled emotion beneath it. The owners had ignored safety violations for years to maximize profits. They paid a fine that amounted to less than one day's revenue. Nora's heart contracted. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I was 14, he continued, his gaze fixed on the memento. "I promised myself I'd build a company powerful enough that no one could ever dismiss the value of workers' lives again." His eyes, when they finally met hers, held a complexity of emotion that took her breath away. "So no, Nora, I don't separate business from human consequences. Every decision I make carries the weight of what I witnessed." The buzz of Ethan's phone shattered the moment. He checked the message, his expression immediately hardening. "Your father has scheduled a press conference for tomorrow morning," he said, all vulnerability vanishing beneath his business persona. "Apparently, he plans to publicly express concern for your well-being and question the legitimacy of our engagement. He's trying to paint me as unstable or coerced," Nora replied, her stomach knotting, creating a narrative that lets him save face. "He's miscalculated," Ethan replied, his tone cold. "Public sympathy will favor the reunited daughter over the controlling father." As Nora prepared to leave, she found not Emma but Daniel Chen, waiting with barely concealed impatience. "Miss Ashford," he said tightly, "a word before you go." Nora nodded, following him to a small conference room. Daniel closed the door before facing her directly. "Ethan has shared parts of his past with you," he stated, watching her reaction carefully. "That's unusual." "I appreciate his trust," Nora replied, unsure of Daniel's intent. "Ethan doesn't trust easily. When he does, he's vulnerable." Daniel's gaze was penetrating behind his glasses. "I've spent 20 years protecting him from that vulnerability." "I'm not Evelyn Morgan," Nora said firmly. "I have no interest in exploiting Ethan's confidence." "Perhaps not intentionally," Daniel conceded. "But this arrangement between you, it's dangerous territory. Ethan claims it's purely strategic. But I know him better than anyone." He leaned forward slightly. "He's beginning to care for you, and caring makes him reckless." The blunt assessment caught Nora off guard. "Our engagement is mutually beneficial business," she insisted, ignoring the flutter in her chest at Daniel's words. "Then keep it that way," Daniel advised. "Ethan rebuilt himself after his parents died. Constructed walls most people never get past. Don't mistake glimpses behind those walls for an invitation to demolish them." He straightened, professional detachment returning. "For both your sakes." The warning followed Nora back to the penthouse, where she found a large manila envelope waiting. Inside was a dossier compiled by her father's private investigator. Photographs of her and Ethan at the gala, entering the Pinnacle, even sitting in his car. A handwritten note from her father simply read, "This charade ends now." When Ethan returned that evening, Nora showed him the envelope without comment. His expression darkened as he examined the contents, the muscle in his jaw tightening. "Your father's desperation is showing," he said finally. "These photos prove nothing except that we're together." "He's building a case," Nora replied. "These are just the first shots." Ethan set the photos down, his gaze meeting hers with unexpected intensity. "Are you afraid?" "Not of my father," Nora answered honestly, "but of the damage he might cause to your company, your reputation." Something softened in Ethan's expression. "Charles Ashford doesn't concern me, Nora. He's fighting a battle with outdated weapons against an enemy he doesn't understand." His hand reached for hers, the gesture more protective than performative. "We'll weather this storm together." The sincerity in his voice made her wonder, for the first time, if their arrangement might be evolving into something. Neither had anticipated something that transcended business and ventured into territory far more dangerous for both their carefully guarded hearts. Chapter 6. Trust Falls. The revised East Side renderings, Mr. Vance, James Carter announced, barely concealing his displeasure as he laid the architectural plans on Ethan's desk. As instructed, we've implemented Miss Ashford's suggestions. Ethan studied the drawings with practiced scrutiny. The redesigned tower now featured a graceful taper that preserved square footage while minimizing shadow impact on Unity Park. Estimated cost increase? Ethan asked. $14 million, plus 3 months of additional construction time. Carter confirmed tightly. Proceed with the revised design. Ethan ordered, and, James, send copies of these to Nora. I'd value her further input. Later that day, Nora visited Ethan's office, carrying an architectural portfolio. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said, closing the door behind her. Not at all, Ethan replied. James just delivered the revised East Side plans. I may have overstepped with Carter, Nora admitted. It wasn't my place to critique your company's design approach. Your assessment was correct, Ethan replied. In fact, I'd like to offer you a consulting position on the project professional collaboration, separate from our personal arrangement. Nora considered the proposal. On one condition, I retain full creative control over my contributions. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Ashford, Ethan said with a rare, genuine smile. They shook hands, the contact lingering longer than necessary. My afternoon meetings have been postponed. Ethan announced suddenly, would you like to see where I grew up? The Bronx? Nora asked, surprised by the invitation. I'd like that very much. An hour later, Ethan's Aston Martin pulled onto a quiet street in the South Bronx. He pointed out landmarks of his youth, the school where he'd met Daniel, the community center that had provided a safe haven, the factory where his parents had worked. Carter Industries, he said, his voice tight, as they passed a renovated building now housing luxury condominiums, demolished after the accident, redeveloped without a single plaque, acknowledging the 12 workers who died there. The bitterness in his tone made Nora reach across to touch his arm. Is that why you became a developer, to ensure places have proper memorials to their history? Ethan glanced at her, surprised by her perception. Partly, though the compromises accumulated so gradually, I barely noticed how far I'd strayed from that original purpose. At a modest diner with a faded sign advertising best coffee in the Bronx. Since 1962, they were warmly greeted by Rosa, the elderly owner who had known Ethan since childhood. Over coffee and apple pie, Ethan shared stories of his youth. The struggles after his parents' deaths, Daniel's family taking him in despite their own financial hardships, the scholarship that had been his ticket out of poverty. I came back after Harvard, he said. But success changes how people see you. The neighbors who'd known me since childhood suddenly treated me like a stranger. It's hard to go home, Nora observed, especially when home has become more symbol than place in your mind. Exactly, Ethan agreed, his voice softening. But being here with you, it feels different, like seeing it through new eyes. Later, at a small park overlooking the river, with Manhattan's skyline visible in the distance, Ethan admitted to anonymously funding neighborhood renovations. The East Side Project, he said pensively. Unity Park reminds me of this place. A community fighting to preserve its identity while improving its future. That's why you agreed to the redesign so readily, Nora realized. You helped me remember something I'd lost sight of. That development should serve communities, not consume them. Ethan's voice dropped lower. You challenge me. Make me question assumptions I'd stopped examining years ago. Is that a good thing? She asked. Terrifying, Ethan admitted with unexpected honesty. But yes, necessary. The confession created an intimacy neither had anticipated. Nora found herself leaning closer, drawn by something stronger than their business arrangement. Ethan's hand came up to gently touch her cheek as their lips met in a kiss unlike their first, not for show, but born of genuine desire. When they parted, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. This wasn't part of our business arrangement, he murmured. No, Nora agreed softly. It wasn't. That evening, at Ethan's beach house on Long Island, they shared dinner that Ethan prepared himself. The modernist structure overlooking the ocean created a sanctuary away from the city's constant scrutiny. As they sat watching moonlight on the waves, Ethan finally spoke of what he'd held back. My father had collected evidence about Carter's violations, he explained. He was planning to expose the investor's wealthy businessmen who kept their involvement hidden. The day before he could take his evidence to authorities, the accident happened. You think it wasn't an accident? Nora asked. I've never confirmed it, Ethan said carefully. But your father's business expanded dramatically in the year after Carter closed. The vulnerability transformed him in Nora's eyes, not the ruthless CEO of reputation, but a man still healing from profound loss. When his lips met hers again, there was no hesitation, No calculation, only genuine desire, and something deeper neither was ready to name. Their connection deepened as the night progressed, transcending the business deal that had brought them together. Later, as Nora lay curled against him, Ethan admitted, "This complicates our arrangement. Life tends to complicate careful plans," Nora replied. "Are you regretting it?" "No," Ethan answered without hesitation, "though emotions make business messy." "Is that all this is business?" Nora challenged gently. Ethan reached up to touch her cheek, vulnerability clear in his expression. "You know, it's become far more than that, Nora." The admission settled between them, a recognition that their carefully structured arrangement had evolved into something neither had anticipated, something that would require courage to explore. Chapter 7. Empire of Cards. Dawn broke over the Atlantic, painting the horizon in hues of gold and rose as Nora stood on the beach house deck, wrapped in Ethan's robe, watching the waves. Behind her, Ethan emerged with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "You're up early," he observed, handing her a cup. "The sunrise was too beautiful to miss," Nora replied. "This place is magical, Ethan, so different from your city persona." "That's why I bought it," he admitted, "somewhere to be myself without the expectations that come with being Ethan Vance, ruthless CEO." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the sea, the intimacy of the previous night lingering in casual contacts and exchanged glances. For the first time since fleeing her wedding, Nora felt genuine happiness in this unexpected connection. During the drive back to Manhattan, Ethan made an impulsive decision. "There's somewhere I want to take you before we return to the penthouse." The car turned off the highway into a familiar neighborhood, the South Bronx, where Ethan had grown up, but this time he drove deeper into the residential streets, finally stopping before a modest brick apartment building. "Apartment 3B, Ethan said, his voice softening with memory. "Where I lived with my parents until I was 14. Nora studied the unremarkable building, understanding the significance of Ethan sharing this most personal connection to his past. "Show me," she said simply. They walked the neighborhood streets hand in hand, Ethan pointing out landmarks of his childhood, the corner where he'd wait for his mother to return from late shifts, the playground where he'd first met Daniel, the small bodega where his father would buy him a candy bar every Friday as a weekly treat. "I haven't been back here in years," Ethan admitted, his expression open in a way Nora had never seen. "After my parents died, the memories were too painful." "And now?" Nora asked quietly. "Now," Ethan said, squeezing her hand, "it feels like reconnecting with something essential I've been missing." He looked at her with unexpected warmth. "You make it easier somehow." As they turned a corner, an elderly man sweeping the sidewalk outside a small grocery looked up, his weathered face registering shock. "Ethan Vance?" he called out in disbelief. "Is that really you, boy?" "Mr. Garcia," Ethan replied, genuine pleasure warming his voice. "Still keeping the cleanest storefront in the Bronx, I see." The old man embraced Ethan with the familiarity of long connection. 10 years you disappear, become a big shot in Manhattan, and then show up out of nowhere. He turned to Nora with undisguised curiosity. "And who is this beautiful lady?" "Nora Ashford," Ethan introduced her. "My fiancée." Mr. Garcia's eyes widened. "The girl from the newspapers? Charles Ashford's daughter?" He laughed heartily. "You always did aim high, Ethan." They spent an hour in Mr. Garcia's small store, drinking coffee and listening to stories of Ethan's childhood, his determination to excel in school despite working part-time, his fierce protection of Daniel against neighborhood bullies, his promise to his mother that he would someday build something meaningful. "Your parents would be proud, Mr. Garcia told Ethan as they prepared to leave, not of the money or the fancy suits, but of the man who still remembers where he came from. The simple words affected Ethan visibly, a shadow of emotion crossing his face as he clasped the older man's hand. "Thank you for saying that." Back in the car, Ethan sat silently for a moment. "I've built my entire identity around success, around proving something," he said finally. "But somewhere along the way, I lost connection to why I started in the first place." Nora covered his hand with hers. "It's not too late to remember." Ethan turned to her with unexpected vulnerability. "You've changed how I see things, Nora. In just a week, you've made me question priorities I've held for 20 years. The admission hung between them, neither quite ready to define the transformation of their arrangement into something far more complex. Their peaceful reconnection was shattered when they arrived at the penthouse to find Daniel pacing the living room, his normally composed demeanor cracked with tension. "Where have you been?" he demanded before they'd fully entered. "I've been calling for hours." "What's happened?" Ethan asked, immediately recognizing his friend's distress. "There's been an accident at the West Side construction site," Daniel replied grimly. "A scaffolding collapse. 3 workers injured, One critically. Ethan's expression instantly transformed. The relaxed man of the morning replaced by the focused CEO. How? Those scaffolds were inspected last week. Preliminary reports suggest tampering, Daniel said quietly. The safety cables were partially cut, would have looked intact during visual inspection but failed under pressure. Sabotage, Ethan said flatly. Daniel nodded, his gaze sliding briefly to Nora before returning to Ethan. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone wanted to hurt the company, create public scandal, maybe even injure workers or worse, Ethan added grimly. Have we identified who had access? Security footage is being reviewed now, Daniel replied. But Ethan, I'm in the hospital. What? Nora exclaimed. Noticing for the first time the bandage visible at Daniel's collar, I was on site for the inspection when it happened, Daniel explained, wincing slightly as he shifted. Dislocated shoulder. Minor concussion. I checked myself out against medical advice when I couldn't reach you. Ethan crossed to his friend. Concern overriding everything else. You should be resting, not tracking me down. You weren't answering, Daniel said pointedly. I was worried. The implication was clear. Ethan had been unreachable because he was with Nora. Distracted from his responsibilities by their evolving relationship, the press is already running with the story. Daniel continued. Stock dropped 8 points in the first hour after the news broke. The workers' families are demanding answers. Ethan's jaw tightened. Get me everything we have on the safety inspections. I want to meet with the injured workers and their families personally, and double security at all our sites immediately. The intimate connection of the morning evaporated as Ethan transformed before Nora's eyes. The warmth and vulnerability replaced by the formidable CEO she'd first encountered. Within minutes, he was on calls with his crisis management team, his legal department, his site managers. Nora stood to the side, suddenly feeling like an intruder in the penthouse that had briefly felt like home. Daniel approached her while Ethan paced nearby, deep in conversation with his head of security. He'll be consumed by this for days, Daniel said quietly. When Ethan's company is threatened, everything else becomes secondary, including personal relationships. I understand, Nora replied, though she felt a subtle chill at the sudden distance Ethan had placed between them. His reputation, his legacy is at stake, Daniel corrected. More than that, those workers are his responsibility. He takes that more seriously than you can imagine. Before Nora could respond, Ethan ended his call and turned to them, his expression grim. I need to get to the hospital. Then the construction site. His eyes met Nora's, something apologetic flickering briefly through the professional mask. This will require my full attention. Of course, she said, maintaining her composure. Do what you need to do. For 3 days, Nora barely saw Ethan. He returned to the penthouse late at night, if at all, and left before dawn. Their brief interactions were cordial but distant, his mind clearly occupied with the crisis. News reports speculated about potential sabotage, about safety negligence, about Vance Enterprises cutting corners for profit. On the 4th morning, Nora was reviewing architectural journals when Emma called. Miss Ashford, the assistant said without preamble, there's a security issue at the penthouse. Mr. Vance asked me to inform you that access protocols have been compromised. Security will escort you to a secure location until the situation is resolved. What kind of security issue? Nora asked, concern edging her voice. Someone accessed confidential files, Emma replied curtly. Mr. Vance believes it may be connected to the scaffolding incident. He's concerned for your safety. The warm connection of their weekend together seemed suddenly distant as Nora packed an overnight bag, escorted by stern-faced security personnel. Ethan's world of corporate intrigue and enemies was reasserting itself, pushing aside the brief happiness they'd found at the beach house. As she entered the waiting car, Nora couldn't help wondering if their relationship could survive in the shadow of Ethan's empire, an empire that now appeared to be under serious attack. Chapter 8. Betrayal's Edge. 5 days after the scaffolding collapse, Nora sat alone in the penthouse, watching news reports detail the ongoing investigation into Vance Enterprises' safety protocols. Nearly a week had passed since their intimate weekend at the beach house, but that connection felt increasingly distant. Ethan had been almost entirely absent, his few brief appearances marked by distraction and a growing coldness that left her increasingly uncertain about their relationship. The past 2 days, he hadn't returned to the penthouse at all, sending only curt messages through Emma about his whereabouts. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Mr. Vance will be in meetings until late tonight. Don't wait up. Another night alone. The message was becoming familiar, though no less disappointing. With a sigh, Nora returned to the East Side project designs. Ethan had asked her to review before the accident work that now seemed unlikely to move forward given the company's current crisis. As she flipped through the files, a misplaced document caught her attention. An internal safety report from one of Ethan's construction sites, dated 6 months earlier. Nora nearly set it aside until a highlighted section caught her eye. Substandard materials detected in structural supports. Replacement cost, $3. 4 million. Recommendation: immediate action required. A handwritten note in the margin simply read, "Defer second quarter. Monitor only." The handwriting was unmistakably Ethan's. Nora's blood ran cold as she flipped through more pages, finding multiple safety concerns flagged and subsequently deferred. The very practices Ethan had condemned, the cost-cutting that had killed his parents, appeared to be standard procedure at his own company. "That can't be right," she whispered, searching for explanations, for context that might justify what she was seeing. But the evidence was damning. Ethan Vance, who had built his empire on the promise of ethical development, had knowingly endangered workers to maximize profits. Feeling physically ill, Nora gathered the documents, determined to confront Ethan directly. She deserved an explanation, and so did the injured workers at the Westside site. The elevator announced an arrival. Expecting Ethan, Nora steeled herself for the difficult conversation ahead. Instead, 2 unfamiliar men in suits stepped out, their expressions coldly professional. "Miss Ashford," the taller one said, "we need you to come with us." Nora took a step back. "Who are you?" "Security consultants hired by your father," the man replied. "Mr. Ashford is concerned for your safety and well-being." "I'm not going anywhere," Nora stated firmly, reaching for her phone. "And I'm calling Ethan right now." "Mr. Vance is occupied with the investigation into his company's negligence," the second man said, which is why Mr. Ashford felt this was an appropriate time to intervene. Before Nora could react, the first man moved with surprising speed, grabbing her arm while his partner produced a cloth that he pressed against her face. The sweet-smelling chemical overwhelmed her senses as she struggled briefly before darkness claimed her consciousness. Ethan sat in his office, surrounded by reports from the accident investigation, his exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. For 5 days, he had worked relentlessly to understand how the scaffolding failure had occurred, to ensure the injured workers received the best care, to contain the damage to his company's reputation. "The preliminary police report confirms sabotage," Daniel said, placing another file on Ethan's desk. "Security footage shows a maintenance worker accessing the scaffolding 2 nights before the collapse, but the image quality is too poor for identification, and the worker remains in critical condition," Ethan said grimly. Daniel nodded, then hesitated before adding, "Have you spoken to Nora recently?" Ethan's expression tightened. "I've been somewhat occupied with preventing my company's collapse. She left several messages," Daniel pointed out, "about some documents she found." "I'll deal with Nora when this crisis is contained," Ethan replied dismissively. "Right now, my priority is finding who sabotaged my construction site." Daniel studied his friend with concern. "This distance between you, it's intentional, isn't it? You're pushing her away." Ethan's jaw clenched. "She's a distraction I can't afford right now." "Or you're retreating behind your walls because getting close to her frightened you," Daniel suggested quietly. "The Ethan Vance I know doesn't run from challenges. The Ethan Vance you know puts business first," Ethan snapped. "Always has." Before Daniel could respond, Ethan's assistant entered with an urgent expression. "Sir, there's something you need to see." She placed a tablet on his desk, displaying security footage from the penthouse, Nora being forcibly removed by 2 men. The timestamp showed it had happened hours earlier. Ethan's face drained of color. "Have you tried calling her? Her phone goes straight to voicemail," the assistant confirmed. "And there's more." She handed him a thick envelope. "This was delivered to reception, addressed to you personally." Inside, Ethan found photos of himself and Nora at his beach house, along with copies of safety reports, the same ones Nora had discovered with sections highlighted to indicate negligence. A note read simply, "She knows what kind of man you really are. She's better off without you. Charles Ashford." Ethan growled, fury replacing shock. "He's taken her." Daniel said carefully, "Look at these reports. They're forgeries. The signatures, the timestamps, they've been altered to implicate you in safety violations you never approved." Ethan examined the documents more closely, recognizing the sophisticated deception. "Someone went to extraordinary lengths to make Nora believe I'm guilty of the same negligence that killed my parents, and then her father's men conveniently arrived to rescue her," Daniel added, understanding dawning. "It's too coordinated to be coincidence." Ethan's expression hardened as pieces fell into place. The scaffolding sabotage, the forged documents, Nora's abduction, it's all connected. He turned to Daniel. Cold determination replacing exhaustion. "Find out where Charles Ashford has taken his daughter. Use every resource we have. And if he's moved her to a secure location," Daniel asked, "then I'll tear down every property he owns until I find her." Ethan replied, the ruthless CEO fully reasserting himself, no one takes what's mine. Nora awoke in her childhood bedroom at the Ashford estate, momentarily disoriented by the familiar surroundings. As awareness returned, so did anger at her father's outrageous action. The door opened to reveal Charles Ashford himself, immaculately dressed as always, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression a practiced mask of paternal concern. You had no right, Nora said immediately, her voice hoarse from the sedative. I had every right. Her father countered smoothly. When my daughter becomes entangled with a man who endangers workers' lives for profit, intervention is not just my right, but my duty. You're lying, Nora challenged, though the memory of the documents she'd found sent a wave of doubt through her. Ethan would never knowingly endanger his workers. Charles placed a folder beside her on the bed, his signature, his handwriting, his decisions to defer critical safety measures. His voice softened with calculated sympathy. I know this is difficult to accept, Nora. You believed his performance. Many have. You drugged and kidnapped me, Nora reminded him, trying to clear her still foggy mind. I removed you from a dangerous situation, Charles corrected. Vance's company is under investigation. His reputation is in free fall. How long before authorities began questioning your involvement? My involvement in what? Nora demanded. In a company that sacrifices safety for profit, Charles replied, did you really think your architectural contributions wouldn't be scrutinized if criminal charges are filed? The calculated manipulation was familiar. Her father had always excelled at creating doubt, at framing his control as protection. Yet the evidence in the folder seemed to confirm her worst fears about Ethan. Why should I believe anything you say? Nora asked, struggling to separate truth from her father's deception. Because, despite our differences, I remain your father, Charles said. And because Victor Langston has agreed to forget your dramatic exit from your wedding, he's still willing to move forward with the merger and the marriage. Nora laughed bitterly. So that's what this is really about. Salvaging your precious deal. It's about securing your future, Charles insisted. Ethan Vance used you, Nora, to improve his image, to spite me, to gain access to Ashford connections. Once his company stabilizes, he'll discard you like every other woman who's briefly captured his attention. As her father left her to consider her position, Nora examined the documents more carefully. The evidence of Ethan's negligence seemed incontrovertible. Yet something felt wrong. The Ethan who had shown her his parents' memento, who had spoken with such pain about corporate disregard for human life. Could he really be guilty of the same transgressions? Doubt crept in like poison. Had she been a fool to trust him? Had their connection been as manufactured as their engagement had initially been? Back at his penthouse, Ethan stared at the empty spaces where Nora's things had been, his expression hardening as Daniel delivered more bad news. The security footage has been deleted from our servers, Daniel reported, and the safety reports Nora found were planted. Someone physically accessed the penthouse while you were both away. Someone with intimate knowledge of our security protocols, Ethan noted grimly, and our past. An alert sounded on Ethan's phone, a news notification about Vance Enterprises. The headline froze his blood. CEO's fiancé flees after discovering company's safety violations. The accompanying article quoted anonymous sources claiming Nora had left Ethan after finding evidence he had knowingly endangered workers' lives. The final paragraph mentioned she had reconciled with her father and was reconsidering her broken engagement to Victor Langston. Ethan hurled his phone across the room, the device shattering against the wall. She believes I'm guilty, he said, his voice hollow. She thinks I'm responsible for the accident. You can't know that, Daniel argued. This could be entirely fabricated by Charles Ashford. It doesn't matter, Ethan replied, moving to the bar and pouring himself a generous whiskey. Nora's made her choice. She's returned to her father rather than trusting me. Ethan, Daniel said carefully, you never gave her reason to trust you these past days. You shut her out completely. Because I needed to focus, Ethan snapped. Because I couldn't afford distraction while my company was under attack. And in doing so, you pushed away the one person who might have stood by you, Daniel pointed out. The Ethan Vance I've known for 30 years doesn't abandon people who matter to him. He fights for them. Ethan stared into his whiskey, conflict evident in his expression. Finally, he set the untouched glass down with a decisive motion. You're right, he acknowledged. I've been a fool. So what are you going to do about it? Daniel challenged. Ethan's expression hardened with determination. Find out who's behind this, clear my name, and then get Nora back if she'll still have me. Chapter 9. Captive Hearts. 3 days into her confinement at the Ashford estate, Nora stood at her bedroom window, watching security guards patrol the grounds. Her father had transformed their family home into a gilded prison, her phone confiscated, internet access restricted, staff monitoring her movements. Maria, the housekeeper who had been like a mother to her, slipped her a folded paper. One of the security men dropped this. It appears to be part of a report. Alone again, Nora unfolded the paper to find what looked like an internal memo detailing the scaffolding sabotage at Ethan's construction site. The document clearly identified the incident as deliberate tampering, contradicting the public narrative of negligence. If this report was genuine, Ethan was being framed, and her father knew it. That evening, Nora decided to play along with her father's charade, joining him and Victor for dinner. "I've been telling Victor how devastated you were to discover Vance's true character," Charles said smoothly. "Sucha fortuna te escape." "Indeed," Nora agreed, forcing a smile. "It seems I've had a narrow escape from several unscrupulous men recently." Victor missed the subtle barb, reaching across to cover her hand with his. "Water under the bridge, my dear. Your father and I understand you were temporarily overwhelmed." "Speaking of Ethan," Nora said casually, "I'm curious why the safety reports I found in his penthouse don't match the ones being reported in the media." A flash of tension crossed her father's face. "Trauma can confuse one's recollections. Dear, have I been traumatized?" Nora pressed. "Or was I manipulated by my own father? Those documents I found, they were forgeries, weren't they? Planted for me to discover. What my daughter needs," Charles replied coldly, "is to remember where her loyalties should lie." "My loyalty is to the truth," Nora countered. "Did you sabotage Ethan's construction site? Did you endanger workers' lives to destroy his reputation?" As the argument escalated, Victor made a revealing comment. "He'll never find you, you know. Vance is too busy trying to save his precious company. We've made certain of that." "You were both behind the sabotage," Nora realized. "A necessary business maneuver," Victor replied smoothly. "Charles and I have mutual interests that Vance threatened. Ethan's parents," Nora said suddenly, pieces falling into place. "Carter Industries. You were connected to it somehow. Ethan's father was going to release documentation of unsafe practices," Charles admitted finally, "documentation that implicated certain investors, including me. You were responsible for the conditions that killed his parents," Nora whispered in horror. "And now you're framing his company for the same negligence." "Everyone has their price," Charles replied. When Nora objected that Daniel would never betray Ethan, he added, "Chen was surprisingly reasonable for a man with access to all of Vance's security protocols. You'll never get away with this," Nora said. "We already have," Victor replied confidently. "By week's end, Vance Enterprises will be facing criminal charges, and Ethan will be lucky to avoid prison." Back in her room, Nora remembered Maria's words about the greenhouse passage. Late that night, she carefully explored the tunnel to determine if it would provide a viable escape route. After confirming it was still passable, she returned to her room to prepare for her final escape attempt. In his penthouse, Ethan discovered disturbing patterns in his company's data. "The security breaches all originated from the same access point," he told Daniel. "Someone with executive clearance has been systematically accessing confidential files for months." "Perhaps an IT vulnerability?" Daniel suggested nervously. "Not according to our system logs," Ethan countered, pushing a printout across the desk. "Executive access. Daniel, your access." After a tense silence, Daniel confessed. "Charles Ashford threatened my family in Taiwan, my parents, my sister's children. He has connections with mainland officials who could make them disappear. You chose my enemies over me," Ethan stated flatly. "I chose my family's safety," Daniel corrected, "though I tried to minimize the damage. The scaffolding was supposed to fail during inspection, not when workers were on it." "Where is Nora?" Ethan demanded. "The Ashford estate in Westchester," Daniel replied reluctantly, "heavily guarded. Charles plans to announce her re-engagement to Langston at a press conference tomorrow." "And then what?" Ethan pressed. "The complete destruction of everything you've built," Daniel confirmed. "Charles Ashford has nurtured his hatred for decades, ever since your father threatened to expose his investment in Carter Industries. Then it's time I lived up to his fears," Ethan decided. "You're going to help me save Nora and expose Charles Ashford." "He'll destroy my family," Daniel protested. "Not if we destroy him first," Ethan countered. "One last collaboration, Daniel. For everything we once meant to each other." As dawn broke, Ethan prepared for the most important battle of his life, not for his company or reputation, but for the woman who had awakened parts of himself he thought long dead, and for the justice his parents had been denied decades earlier. Chapter 10. Shattered Glass. The night cloaked Ethan's Aston Martin as it sped toward the Ashford estate. Beside him, Daniel sat in tense silence, the weight of his betrayal hanging heavy between them. "Charles changes the security codes every 48 hours, Daniel said. breaking the silence. "Today's rotation just started. We have a small window before he realizes I've given you access." Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "And Nora's exact location?" "East wing, second floor, her old bedroom." Daniel hesitated. "Charles has at least 8 armed guards patrolling the grounds." "Ethan, this is suicide without police backup. The police won't move against Charles Ashford without concrete evidence." Ethan replied grimly, "We need the original documents that connect him to Carter Industries, the evidence my father had before he died. Those documents disappeared 30 years ago." Daniel reminded him, "Not disappeared, hidden." Ethan's expression hardened. As they approached the estate's outer perimeter, he continued, "My father sent copies to his brother the day before the accident. When I turned 18, my uncle gave me a safe deposit key but never explained its significance." Understanding dawned on Daniel's face. "You have the evidence?" "I've had it for years without realizing what it was. Property deeds, investment records, internal memos warning about structural failures." Ethan pulled the car to a stop in the shadow of trees bordering the estate. "Everything connecting Charles Ashford to the deaths of 12 workers, including my parents." "Why didn't you use it?" Daniel asked, genuinely confused. "Because until now, I never connected Ashford to my parents' deaths." Ethan replied, his voice tight with controlled rage, "I thought they were just documents about corporate negligence at Carter. I never traced the shell companies back to Ashford Investments." As they approached the estate's security gate, Daniel entered the access code with trembling fingers. The gate swung open silently, allowing them onto the expansive grounds. "If Charles discovers you've helped me," Ethan began. "My family is already being moved to secure locations." Daniel interrupted. "I may have betrayed you, Ethan, but I'm trying to make it right." They separated at the main house, Daniel heading to disable the interior security system, while Ethan circled toward the east wing, avoiding the patrolling guards with practiced stealth, scaling the ornate trellis to the second-floor balcony. Ethan found Nora's window unlocked but her room empty, the bed clearly not slept in. A wave of dread washed over him. Had Charles moved her? Was he too late? A noise from the hallway caught his attention. Drawing deeper into the shadows, Ethan watched as the bedroom door slowly opened. To his shock, a disheveled Nora slipped inside, her clothes covered in dust and cobwebs. "Ethan!" she gasped upon seeing him, rushing into his arms. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, holding her tightly. "No, just filthy from checking the old smuggler's tunnel," she explained quickly. "I was preparing to escape tonight. I've confirmed the tunnel is still passable and was coming back to get my things." She clutched his arms urgently. "I was going to come find you. My father and Victor, they're behind everything. The scaffolding sabotage, the forged documents. And Daniel, I know." Ethan cut her off gently. "Daniel's helping us escape. He was coerced. Charles threatened his family." Confusion crossed her face. "Then why did Victor say?" A slow, mocking applause interrupted them as the lights suddenly blazed on. Victor Langston stood in the doorway, a pistol held casually at his side. "The star-crossed lovers reunite," he drawled. "How touching." "Victor," Nora said carefully, stepping slightly away from Ethan, "you don't want to do this." "Actually, I very much do," Victor replied, his polished veneer giving way to cold malice. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it was being left at the altar by Charles Ashford's daughter for some self-made upstart from the Bronx?" "This isn't about Nora," Ethan stated flatly. "It's about Charles using you to conceal his connection to Carter Industries." Something flickered in Victor's expression. "You know about that?" "I know Charles Ashford was responsible for my parents' deaths," Ethan confirmed, "and I have the documents to prove it." Victor's laugh held no humor. "Documents that will never see the light of day." He raised the gun, aiming directly at Ethan's chest. "Charles wants you alive for questioning, but accidents happen. You'd add murder to corporate sabotage?" Nora challenged, her voice steady. Despite her fear, "I'm merely protecting my fiancé from an obsessed stalker who broke into her family home," Victor countered smoothly. "The courts will call it justifiable defense." "The courts might be interested in this instead." Daniel's voice came from behind Victor, accompanied by the distinctive sound of a cell phone recording being stopped. "Your confession to corporate sabotage and premeditated murder, transmitted live to my attorney." Victor whirled toward the new threat, his gun swinging wildly. In that moment of distraction, Ethan lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. The gun discharged with a deafening crack, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling as the two men struggled for control. Despite Ethan's superior strength, Victor fought with desperate fury, landing a solid blow to Ethan's temple that momentarily stunned him. Seizing the advantage, Victor scrambled away, retrieving the gun and taking aim once more. "No," Nora cried, throwing herself forward. Another shot rang out, But from the doorway, Charles Ashford stood there, a second pistol in his steady hand. His expression cold as Victor crumpled to the floor, wounded but alive. "Father!" Nora whispered in disbelief. "Step away from him, Nora," Charles commanded. His gun now trained on Ethan. "Mr. Vance and I have unfinished business." "Charles," Daniel began cautiously. "Silence." Charles snapped. "Your usefulness ended the moment you betrayed me, Chen." His attention returned to Ethan, who had risen to his feet, blood trickling from his temple. 30 years I've kept my connection to Carter buried. I won't allow you to destroy everything I've built, like you destroyed the lives of 12 families, including mine?" Ethan challenged. "Necessary sacrifices for progress." Charles replied, without remorse. "Just like you'll be." As Charles's finger tightened on the trigger, Nora moved with instinctive speed, knocking her father's arm upward. The gun discharged harmlessly into the ceiling, but Charles reacted with unexpected violence, shoving his daughter aside with enough force to send her crashing into an antique mirror. The sound of shattering glass was drowned out by Ethan's roar of rage. He charged Charles with reckless abandon, caring nothing for the gun still in the older man's hand. Their collision sent both men to the floor, the weapon skittering away across polished hardwood. "You'll never touch her again," Ethan growled, pinning Charles with a strength born of 30 years of contained fury. Charles struggled beneath him, his composed facade finally cracking completely. "You're nothing, a nobody from the Bronx who got lucky," he spat, the words like venom. "You think she could ever truly love someone like you?" "I do love him." Nora's voice came steadily as she rose from the broken glass. A shallow cut on her cheek, more than I ever thought possible. The simple declaration froze both men. Ethan's eyes met Nora's across the room, seeing truth in her steady gaze. The moment shattered, as Victor, still conscious despite his wound, lunged for the dropped gun. Daniel kicked it beyond his reach, but Victor grabbed a jagged piece of mirror glass instead, staggering to his feet with murderous intent. "If I can't have what's mine," he snarled, advancing on Nora, "no one will." Ethan released Charles, diving toward Nora as Victor attacked. The shard of glass caught Ethan in the side, slicing deep as he placed himself between Nora and danger. Despite the pain, Ethan managed to land a devastating blow that finally rendered Victor unconscious. "Ethan!" Nora cried, catching him as he stumbled backward, blood spreading rapidly across his shirt. "It's nothing," he lied, his face pale as he sank to his knees. The room suddenly filled with police officers, their arrival a blur of shouted commands and raised weapons. Charles and the semi-conscious Victor were quickly restrained, while paramedics rushed to Ethan's side. "The evidence," Ethan murmured to Daniel, as they lifted him onto a stretcher. "Safe deposit box key in my desk." "I'll handle it," Daniel promised, genuine remorse in his eyes. "Just stay alive, Ethan." As they carried Ethan from the room, his gaze locked with Nora's. "You said you love me," he whispered, his voice weakening. "Did you mean it?" "With all my heart," she replied, tears streaming down her face as she held his increasingly cold hand. "So don't you dare leave me now, Ethan Vance." His smile was faint but genuine as consciousness began to slip away. "Wouldn't dream of it," he managed before darkness claimed him, the paramedics increasing their pace as his vital signs began to falter. Chapter 11. Rising from Ashes. Antiseptic scents and the rhythmic beeping of medical equipment filled the private hospital room where Ethan lay unconscious, pale against the white sheets. For 3 days, Nora had maintained her vigil at his bedside, leaving only when the nurses insisted. "The surgery went well, doctor," Patel explained, "but he lost a significant amount of blood. The next 24 hours will be critical." Nora nodded, her tired eyes never leaving Ethan's face. The cut on her own cheek had been neatly stitched, a physical reminder of the violence that had finally exposed decades of secrets. "You should rest," Daniel urged, entering with coffee. In the days since the confrontation, he had worked tirelessly to make amends, providing authorities with evidence, handling press inquiries, keeping Vance Enterprises functioning. "I need to be here when he wakes up," Nora insisted, accepting the coffee without shifting her gaze from Ethan. Daniel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He's fighting for you, you know." The doctor said his heart stopped briefly in the ambulance. "He came back when the paramedic mentioned your name." Tears welled in Nora's eyes. "I've known him such a short time, yet I can't imagine my life without him now." "That's how it happens sometimes," Daniel said softly. "Years of building walls, then the right person walks through them like they were never there." He continued, showing her news headlines on his tablet. "The evidence from Ethan's safe deposit box is damning. Business titan Charles Ashford charged in decades. Old factory deaths, Ashford-Langston merger collapses as fraud charges mount. Vance Enterprises cleared of negligence. Sabotage confirmed. The workers injured in the scaffolding collapse are all stable now. Victor turned on my father? Nora asked, surprised. Charles tried to make Victor the fall guy for the scaffolding sabotage, Daniel explained. When Victor discovered your father was planning to sacrifice him to save himself, he decided self-preservation was more important than loyalty. He's providing prosecutors with details of Charles's involvement in exchange for reduced charges. He finally gets justice for his parents, Nora whispered, gently taking Ethan's limp hand. I just need him to wake up to see it. Ethan deserves happiness more than anyone I know, Daniel said, regret heavy in his voice. I nearly destroyed that possibility with my betrayal. You were protecting your family, Nora replied without judgment. Ethan understands that better than most. Still, I'll spend the rest of my life making it right, Daniel promised. He hesitated, then added, his mother would have loved you, you know. She was like you, brilliant, principled, unwilling to be intimidated by powerful men. The personal glimpse into Ethan's past touched Nora deeply. She squeezed Ethan's hand as if to share the moment with him and, to her surprise, felt a faint pressure in return. Ethan, she whispered, hope blossoming. Can you hear me? His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. Confusion clouded his gaze briefly before focusing on her face. Nora, he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. You're hurt, she laughed through sudden tears. Says the woman with a stitched cheek, he replied weakly, his hand tightening around hers. Worth it. Your father's in custody, Daniel answered, stepping closer. Along with Langston, the evidence your father preserved all those years ago has exposed everything. Your parents finally have justice, Ethan. A complex emotion crossed Ethan's face, relief, mingled with an old grief long carried. His eyes glistened with tears he was too weak to hide. They can rest now, he whispered. His gaze returned to Nora, intensity shining through his physical weakness. You said something before I passed out, that I love you. She confirmed softly. I meant it, Ethan. Not the fake engagement. Not the arrangement. I love the real you, the man who grew up in the Bronx, who remembers where he came from, who put himself between me and danger without hesitation. Ethan's eyes held hers with an intensity that belied his weakened state. I've been falling in love with you since you invaded my hotel suite in a ruined wedding dress, he admitted. I just couldn't admit it, even to myself. I was afraid of caring that much again. I know, Nora said gently. But some risks are worth taking. Daniel cleared his throat. I'll give you two a moment, he said tactfully, withdrawing. When they were alone, Ethan reached up to gently touch the bandage on Nora's cheek. I'm sorry you were caught in the middle of this vendetta. I was exactly where I needed to be, she corrected him. And where I intend to stay if you'll have me. For real this time. For real? Ethan asked. Vulnerability naked in his expression. No business arrangement. No strategic alliance. For real, Nora promised, leaning down to kiss him gently. Just us. Building something genuine together. As she drew back, Ethan's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion reclaiming him. But his hand remained firmly clasped in hers, a tangible connection neither intended to break again. Outside the hospital room, Daniel stood guard, a silent promise to protect the rare happiness his friend had finally found, and perhaps in time, to earn forgiveness for nearly destroying it. Chapter 12. Architects of Love. 6 months later, Nora stood on the rooftop of the newly completed Bronx Community Center, watching children explore the playground her design had incorporated. The modern building stood as a testament to transformation both of the neighborhood and of Vance Enterprises' renewed commitment to ethical development. Your vision brought this to life, Ethan said, joining her at the railing. He moved more carefully these days, his recovery still ongoing, but the pride in his eyes as he surveyed the project was unmistakable. Our vision, Nora corrected him. You're funding my design. Across the city, the revised East Side project was rising according to Nora's specifications, a testament to the community-centered approach they'd championed together. The Unity Park neighborhood had embraced the development after seeing how Nora's redesign preserved their historical character while creating new opportunities. The project had become a model for ethical urban renewal. With developers from across the country studying their approach, Daniel stood nearby, speaking quietly with one of the center's administrators. After Charles Ashford's arrest, Ethan had used his international connections to secure a permanent U.S. residency for Daniel's parents and sister, bringing them safely from Taiwan beyond Charles's reach. Though their friendship had been tested, Daniel's dedication to making amends had slowly rebuilt the trust between them. Ethan smiled, the expression coming more naturally to him now. The past months had changed them both. Ethan stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic direction. Nora establishing her own architectural firm, specializing in community-centered development. Charles Ashford's empire had crumbled following his arrest. With her father awaiting trial, Nora had redirected her inheritance toward a foundation supporting families affected by workplace accidents, honoring the legacy of Ethan's parents and others who had suffered from corporate negligence. "The children look happy," Ethan observed, watching a group race across the innovative play structures Nora had designed. "That's the highest compliment an architect can receive," she replied. "Not awards or magazine features, but seeing people genuinely enjoy the spaces we create." The rooftop garden where they stood represented their collaborative vision, a green oasis in the urban landscape. Accessible to community members rather than reserved for wealthy tenants, throughout the building, similar touches reflected their shared philosophy: beauty and functionality serving community needs rather than corporate profit. "I have something for you," Ethan said, reaching into his pocket, "a token of appreciation for everything you've accomplished here." Instead of the expected small gift, he withdrew a simple black velvet box. Nora's breath caught as Ethan slowly, carefully lowered himself to one knee. "Ethan," she whispered, her heart racing, "when you crashed into my life wearing that ruined wedding dress, I thought I was offering you a business deal," he began, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I never imagined you would reshape my world, challenge my priorities, and remind me of the man I always wanted to become." He opened the box, revealing a ring far simpler and more meaningful than the ostentatious Cartier diamond of their fake engagement. A platinum band holding a sapphire surrounded by smaller stones. "The sapphire was my mother's," Ethan explained. "The diamonds came from my first architectural award medallion. Together, they represent who I was and who I've become with you." Nora's eyes filled with tears as Ethan continued, "Nora Ashford, will you marry me not for appearances, not for business advantage, but because I love you and want to build a life with you?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, her smile radiant through her tears. "Yes, Ethan Vance, I will absolutely marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, applause erupted from the doorway, where the community center staff had gathered to witness the moment. Among them stood Daniel, his redemption earned through months of dedicated work, rebuilding trust. Later, as the sunset painted the city skyline in gold and rose, Ethan and Nora stood alone on the rooftop, his arm around her waist as they gazed toward Manhattan's glittering towers. "From a fake engagement to a real one," Nora mused, leaning into his embrace, "not the path I expected when I fled my wedding." "The best architecture sometimes emerges from unexpected foundations," Ethan replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We just needed the right blueprint." As twilight deepened around them, they remained together on the rooftop of the building that symbolized their shared vision. Two people who had found in each other not just love, but a partner in creating something meaningful and lasting from the broken pieces of their pasts. "I love you, Ethan Vance," Nora whispered, turning in his arms to face him. "And I love you, Nora Ashford," he responded, his eyes holding promises of the future they would build together, today and always. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their commitment, not a business arrangement or a strategic alliance, but a genuine partnership forged through challenge and choice, designed to weather whatever storms might come.